To you and happy Women's Day.
Morning, happy Women's Day.
Thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with the actual representation of that uniform. I think a lot of people know what we're talking about when we speak of Mmabatho Montsho, but you often don't get the meaning of the entire uniform.
Yeah, I mean, the uniform has a rich history because when they started, they wore a uniform that was sort of reminiscent of the nurse's uniform at the time. And how the organization started to begin with was that the women wanted a mission for themselves because they were not allowed leadership positions in the church. So it was sort of a self-determining project. When they saw the British soldiers, I can't remember which year it was, they sort of co-opted that uniform to say we are soldiers of God, we are soldiers in our space. But there's also other meanings, like they wear black, red and white bibs and white hats, and it's I once was blind but through the blood I now see. And I find the through the blood interesting because it could be through the blood of Christ, it could be through the blood of political death, it could be through the blood of everything is renewed through blood, so it's got quite a deep meaning for me.
Is that what attracted you to Mmabatho Montsho, or is there another reason when there's so many other, I guess, religions to have chosen from?
No, I mean, how the painting started was through visions that I was having. And usually that's how stories come to me. So I wrote a script thinking that's what was happening. Right. But those visions were only resolved when I created the artworks. So each piece sort of came from a compelling vision. So I can't say I chose it more than it chose me.
Chose you.
Yeah.
And the process. Tell us about the process.
The process, I mean, I will usually get the vision, get the idea, but it comes sort of like as a haunting sort of image. Sometimes I'll take my camera and go drive around on a Sunday morning and take pictures, of what I saw in my head and sort of try to get a visual reference of it. I'm pedantic because I'm in the film industry. I want the lighting to work properly, those types of things. But I work in oil on canvas. I work from home. It's a very simple, there's nothing ceremonious about it at all. It's a very simple process, yeah.
What is the environment like for an artist, for a female filmmaker in South Africa?
Look, for a black female creative in any space is sort of, most spaces are dominated by white males to begin with. I mean, when I was doing art in high school, it was, my idea of it was it's for old white men. I didn't conceive it as something that we could do. So I think any creative space that a black woman can get into, they've sort of, they're making a statement and writing ourselves into the narrative. In terms of the professional art space, I'm fairly new to it, so I can't speak much on it. I only know which artists I like, from having followed them before, but I don't move in the space, so I don't really know. I can't speak on it.
And what has that transition been like, if it was a transition? I mean, you say you're a filmmaker and then coming into the art space and being fairly new.
I wouldn't call it a transition because I've painted my whole life. My exhibition is at Constitution Hill. It's not at a formal gallery. So it's just an extension of what I've always done, just putting it out on a different platform. And for me, fine art and filmmaking, they're all visual arts, and it's telling a story in a frame, with a piece of art, it's telling a story in one frame, and in filmmaking, it's telling a story in several frames. You still have to think about the image. When I'm directing, I always say, if I switch the volume off from the image that I'm seeing, can I tell what the story is? And that's pretty much the same thing with fine art, with painting.
Why storytelling? What is it about storytelling that just gets you going?
Look, I don't think we can explain quite easily why we like the things that we like, but there is something about witnessing people and their lives and saying, I see you, I saw your story, I witnessed you, that I find attractive about storytelling. Even if it's a fictional story, there's always something that resonates with somebody. There's always a truth that speaks to someone. And that in itself is saying, yes, I see you, I recognize you, you are here, you matter. So, yeah. I guess
and why is it important that we tell our own stories? There's so much that is happening in the country, especially when it comes to women. The president this week saying there's a war on women's bodies, and we've seen things that happen specifically to women in South Africa.
I mean, that's precisely it. When you're not telling your own story, somebody else can tell you who you are, someone else can tell you where you belong in the world. and that lends itself to how you're treated in the world. So if women are always depicted in an objective, like if they're objectified sort of way, that has consequences. People are going to behave towards you a certain way. I mean, if you watch commercials, for example, say a flu medication, it's always the man and the son who's sick, and it's always the woman who gives the medication. So the communication is there, is that women don't get sick, women don't need to be taken care of.
You're superwoman. The
yeah, you don't need to be taken care of. Nobody is going to open your mouth and give you like a bit of cough mixture. And that plays itself out in society. We see a lot of women falling apart because nobody is realizing that they also need taken care of, because they've been projected as the nurturer. So when we tell our own stories, we are able to then change the narrative and say, no, I also need to be taken care of. No, I also feel pain. I also get tired. You know, I also have dreams. I also have aspirations. So it is very important for any group of people to have access and the power to tell their own story, so that they can shape and determine their own narrative and their own space in the world.
Right.
Yeah.
How do we bring men into the conversation, and also on a continental level? You find some of the continental bodies are still very male-dominated. You mentioned a little bit earlier on that the space that you're in as well is very much white male-dominated. How do we bring men into the space to, first of all, recognize that? It's difficult to say this because it's like, why should we fight to be seen still in 2018? Yeah. But how do we bring everybody together and have a dialogue instead of blaming or constantly attacking each other?
I don't think it's blaming. It's a fact that the world is patriarchal. It is a system. It is, you know, it functions in every space that you come into. In the workplace is patriarchal. At home is patriarchal. In the church is patriarchal. I mean, you go to the loo and you still experience patriarchy there. Right. So it's not a blame game. It's a fact. And you can't change a thing until you name it, until you say this is what the problem is. So I think it's dangerous to say it's a blame game, because then it puts us as the enemy. It makes us seem to be impossible, irrational. And those are the things that patriarchy has also designed, to make us feel guilty for calling out behaviors that make us uncomfortable. And I mean, the conversations are led and created by men, because they own most of the media space. They own most of business. They own most of the world. So we first have to determine how we are heard before we can think about coddling. That's just my perspective. Right. Because if you're fighting to be heard, how are you bringing anybody into a conversation if you yourself are not given a platform to be heard to begin with? Yeah.
Our role as women, some would very well argue that the biggest gatekeepers of patriarchy are women.
I don't think the biggest gatekeepers of patriarchy are women. That is not true. There are women definitely who subscribe to patriarchy. But if you're not in a position of power, you can hardly be a gatekeeper of something. And patriarchy reproduces itself, so it will uplift and put at the gate the woman who subscribes to it. But I think the most important thing for us is to, first of all, be conscious of the world that we live in and that it is patriarchal, and to conscientize each other when we do not know, to be patient with each other, to teach each other, and to explain to each other when we don't understand. We should not be elitist and, you know, think we know better and you go out and do your own work. Right. Activism is about the patience, the teaching of the people, the constantly repeating yourself until people do understand. Because people don't wake up in the morning looking to be any kind of activist. The situation that you live in provokes that in you. So if we are constantly patient with each other and we take each other's hand and walk each other along, there is more progress to be had than if we are elitist and arrogant about what we know versus what someone else doesn't know.
Right, and leaving other people out of the conversation, I guess.
Yeah.
Let's go back to your exhibition on Manyano. How has that been received?
It's so overwhelming for me. I don't even know what to say. It's been received so well. Everyone has been so supportive. I mean, people showed up in their numbers last night. All the different interpretations that they had about the work were insightful to me. You know, they were revelatory to me, because as much as you can think you have an intention on something, once it's out there, people are allowed to have their own conversation with it. And I'm just fascinated by everything everyone said last night. you know, the Manyano women from my mother's church came through, so it was quite emotional. But yeah, it's been received really well.
Bless. Let's talk to somebody that wants to do what you do. Let's talk to a young woman who's looking at you right now and thinking, wow, I really, that resonates with me and I want to get into the space. The realities and some of the good things about the space.
Look, I think first and foremost, what I would say to young women is that they must give themselves permission to do what they want to do. They should not wait to be invited into any space. They should not wait for anyone to give them permission. They should give themselves the permission. They should drive themselves. And why I say that is because when you lead yourself into a space, you're able to change it in interesting ways. And there's so much that we can learn from the younger generation because they see the world so differently. So I may say, these are the steps that you can take, but it may not work for somebody else because our journeys are different. So you don't have to emulate someone else's journey. Be true to your own, and you will be the master of your own journey because you know yourself best. But most importantly, you belong to yourself, your ideas are valid, and you should push for yourself. Don't wait for us to say, yeah, now you're good enough, come through.
The space is conducive, Etla.
Yeah, no, because the more of us there are, the more the space grows. Because sometimes spaces look so little, like there's no room for me, but that's because people are not participating. And our interpretation of everything will be different. If people decided to do films on their phones, it would change the filming landscape. If people decided to do art on A4 paper with whatever, it could change the space. So go ahead, do you, be honest about who you are, and the world will meet you along the way.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This was very insightful.